You are not his wife. You are a woman he felt sorry for. That's what my mother-in-law said to me, standing in a hallway that smelled like hand sanitizer and old coffee, for hours after two Marines in dress blues knocked on my door and told me my husband wasn't coming home. She said it quietly, almost politely, like she was correcting my grammar. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I did. I stood there in the same clothes I'd hadn't slept in, holding a folded flag I hadn't even been given yet, and I let her words hang in the air between us. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at her. My name is Raina Cole. My husband was Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, United States Marine Corps, and this is the story of what his family tried to take from me after he died, and the one thing he did, 3 days before he deployed for the last time, that they never saw coming. Danny and I met at a diner outside Camp Lejeune. I was 24, working double shifts to pay off nursing school, and he was 26, sitting alone in a booth with a paperback novel and a black coffee, like some kind of throwback. He proposed 11 months later in that same booth, with a ring he'd been paying off for 6 months on a staff sergeant's salary. We got married at the courthouse because that's what we could afford, and we had a reception in his CO's backyard with folding chairs and a cooler of beer, and it was, without question, the best day of my life. His mother, Carol, didn't come. She said the courthouse wedding was an insult to the family, that I was clearly after something, that a boy like Danny, her words, a boy, even though he was a grown man who'd done 2 tours, could have done better. Danny told me not to let it get to me. He said his mother had never liked anyone he'd brought home, that it wasn't about me specifically. I believed him, mostly because I wanted to. His sister, Jenna, was worse in a quieter way. Jenna smiled at me. Jenna hugged me at Thanksgiving. Jenna also asked me, in front of the whole table, when Danny was going to wake up and get out of the military so he could actually make something of himself. Like 14 years of service was a phase. Like the Purple Heart in his sock drawer was a hobby. I said nothing that night. I said nothing most nights. Danny used to squeeze my hand under the table when his family started in, a little pressure that meant not today, and I learned to read it like a second language. Here's what nobody tells you about loving someone whose family doesn't love you back. You don't get to react. Not really. Not if you want to keep the peace for the person you actually married. So you swallow it. You get good at swallowing it. But I want to talk about what love actually looked like, because Carol and Jenna had a version of it that involved showing up for photos and disappearing for everything else, and I had a different version. I filled out Danny's VA paperwork every single time he came back, because the forms made his hands shake in a way he never told his mother about. I drove 4 hours each way, twice a month, to sit in a drab little room at Walter Reed with him during the year he was recovering from the IED in Helmand, the one his mother found out about from Facebook 3 weeks after it happened, because I was too busy holding his hand to make phone calls. I learned how to pack his sea bag so nothing shifted during transport. I learned which nightmares needed me to just hold him, and which ones needed me to turn on the light and say his name until his eyes cleared. I paid the power bill the month he forgot, because his mind was still half deployed. I signed him up for a night class he was too anxious to sign himself up for. I sat in a folding chair at 11 different unit family functions where other wives had known each other for years and I knew no one, because I wanted him to look up from whatever he was doing and see me there. I did this. I did that. I did the 1,000 invisible, boring, unglamorous things that never make it into anyone's toast at a wedding. Carol sent a Christmas card. Jenna liked his Instagram posts. That was the extent of the Cole family's involvement in my husband's life for the 6 years I knew him. So when I tell you what happened after he died, I need you to understand, I wasn't a stranger showing up with a claim. I was the last 24 hours of his life, every day for 6 years. Danny was killed during a training accident on a joint exercise in the Pacific. I'm not going to describe how, because it doesn't matter, and because some details are mine to keep. What matters is that the casualty notification officer showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning in April, and by Tuesday afternoon, Carol Cole was already telling people I had manipulated her son into a marriage he would have left eventually. She said this at the funeral home, while we were picking out a casket. The funeral director, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Alvarez who had clearly seen every kind of grief-warped family fight there was, quietly slid a folder across the table to me instead of to her, and that was the first sign that something didn't add up the way Carol thought it did. Because here's what Carol didn't know. Here's what nobody but Danny, a Marine Corps legal assistance attorney, and, it turned out, one very sharp casualty assistance officer, knew. 3 days before Danny shipped out for that final deployment, He'd walked in the legal assistant's office on base and spent 45 minutes with a JAG officer named Captain Osei, updating every single document that determines what happens to a service member when the worst happens. His DD Form 93, the record of emergency data, his SGLI beneficiary designation, his life insurance, and a full will, drafted and notarized, naming me, not his mother, not his sister, as his sole beneficiary, his next of kin for all military purposes, and the person with full authority over his remains. He'd never told me. Not because he was hiding anything from me, Captain Osei explained later, but because Danny didn't want me thinking about his death at all, let alone planning for it on a night when we were supposed to be enjoying our last dinner together before deployment. He signed those papers, came home, and made me spaghetti. That was Danny. He carried the weight, so I wouldn't have to feel its edges. Carol didn't know any of this. Carol assumed that as his mother, blood trumped everything. She marched into the casualty assistant's office 4 days after the notification and demanded to be listed as next of kin, demanded control of the funeral, demanded, and this is a direct quote from the casualty assistant's call's officer's own notes, which I saw much later, her rightful place as the mother of a hero, over some girl he barely knew. Some girl he barely knew. 6 years of marriage. 6 years of forms and folded flags and forgotten power bills. The casualty assistance officer, a soft-voiced gunnery sergeant named GYSGT. Mireles, did something I will be grateful for as long as I live. She didn't argue with Carol in that moment. She simply said, "Ma'am, I'll need to check the record," walked into a back office, pulled Danny's DD, 93, and came back out holding it like a shield. "Ma'am," she told Carol, Staff Sergeant Cole updated his emergency data 3 days before he deployed. His wife is his sole next of kin and sole beneficiary of record. "I'm sorry, but this isn't a family decision. It's already been made." I wasn't in the room for that conversation. I heard about it secondhand, from Mireles herself, a week later, when she sat me down and, very gently, told me what my husband had done without telling me. I cried harder over that piece of paper than I had at the notification. Because it wasn't a legal document to me. It was Danny in a chair across from a lawyer, quietly making sure that even if the absolute worst happened, no one could shut me out of saying goodbye to him. But paperwork doesn't stop a determined mother-in-law. It just changes her tactics. Carol called me 11 days after the funeral arrangements were finalized. I remember the date because it was the day I was supposed to pick out a headstone, alone, because apparently that's also something a girl he barely knew does by herself. "I think we should talk woman to woman," she said, her voice syrupy in a way that made my skin crawl. "I know things have been tense, but Danny would want his family taken care of. His SGLI, that's $400,000, Raina. That's Cole family money. You didn't grow up with him. You didn't raise him. I think it's only fair that some of that goes toward honoring his memory properly. A scholarship in his name. Something with the family's input." Translation: "Give me the money." "And the house," she continued before I could respond. "That was supposed to stay in the family." The house was in a small town outside Jacksonville, and Danny and I had bought it together. Our names on the deed, paid for with our joint savings and a VA loan. Carol had visited exactly twice. I told her I'd think about it, because I'd learned by then that arguing with Carol in the moment never worked, it only fed her. What I actually did was call Captain Osei back and ask her, calmly, what my rights were. Captain Osei laughed, not unkindly, and told me something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Cole, your husband did everything right on purpose, specifically so this conversation couldn't happen. You don't owe her anything. Not because I'm telling you not to, because he already told her, legally, 6 months ago." Carol didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, Jenna showed up at my door unannounced, holding a casserole dish like some kind of Trojan horse. "Mom's really hurting," Jenna said, stepping past me into my own kitchen without being asked. "She just wants to feel like part of this. You could let her have some of his medals. The house, at least think about it. You'll remarry eventually, Raina." Danny would want the Cole name to mean something to the next generation. I stood in my kitchen and listened to my dead husband's sister suggest, with a straight face, that I should give away his memory in preparation for the day I supposedly replaced him. "Get out of my house," I said. For words. The calmest I have ever sounded while feeling the least calm. Jenna's face did something ugly then, something that had probably always been under the surface. "You were his charity case," she said. "He felt sorry for you. Everyone in the family knew it. He just never had the heart to tell you. I want to tell you I had some devastating comeback. I didn't. I just opened the front door wider and waited until she left. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor and let myself feel every single thing I'd been swallowing since April. Carol escalated one more time. And this is the part where the story stops being about hurt feelings and starts being about something that could actually be witnessed. She filed a formal dispute with the Marine Corps Casualty Division, contesting the SGLI beneficiary designation, claiming Danny had been of unsound mind from PTSD when he updated it, and that I had unduly influenced him during a vulnerable period. She also, separately, tried to organize a memorial service of her own, a competing one, at a church 2 towns over, inviting extended family and Danny's childhood friends, deliberately scheduled to conflict with the service I'd already planned with his unit. That's when Captain Osei stepped in fully, and that's when this stopped being a family matter and became, formally, a legal one. The dispute Carol filed required a review. It required, as these things do, documentation. And documentation meant that everything came out into the open in a room, with witnesses, instead of staying in hallway whispers and casserole dish ambushes. The hearing happened at the base legal office, 6 weeks after Danny died. Present were Captain Osei, GYSGT, Mireles, a review officer from Marine Corps Casualty Affairs named Major Whitfield, myself, and Carol, who'd brought Jenna and, for reasons I still don't fully understand, a family friend who apparently practiced real estate law and thought that qualified him to speak on military survivor benefits. Carol made her case first. She talked about Danny's childhood. She talked about his diagnosis, 2 years earlier, of PTSD, and how any decision he made afterward should be considered suspect. She used the phrase clearly manipulated 4 times. I counted. Major Whitfield listened to all of it without expression. Then he opened a folder. Mrs. Cole, he said, looking at Carol, I have here the notarized will, the beneficiary designation, and the emergency data form, all signed and dated the same day, 3 days before Staff Sergeant Cole's deployment. I also have a signed statement from Captain Osei, who personally conducted the intake interview and confirmed Staff Sergeant Cole was lucid, unpressured, and, in her words, unusually clear and deliberate about his intentions. I also have his most recent psychological evaluation from 4 months prior, which found him fit for duty with no impairment to decision-making capacity. He paused. The room was completely silent. Even Jenna had stopped fidgeting with her purse strap. I also have this, Major Whitfield continued, and he slid a single sheet of paper across the table. A handwritten letter, filed with his will at his own request, to be read only in the event of his death, addressed to his mother. Carol's face changed. I watched 30 years of certainty drain out of it in real time. Would you like me to read it? Major Whitfield asked. Or would you prefer to read it privately? Read it, Carol said, quieter than I'd ever heard her. I won't repeat every word, because that letter belongs to her now, not to this story. But I'll tell you the last line, because Danny asked, specifically, that it be read aloud if this exact situation ever happened. He knew his mother. He knew what she might try. And he left her a sentence that I think about almost every day. Mom, if you're hearing this, it means you tried to fight Raina for something that was never yours to take. I loved you my whole life. I chose her for the rest of it. Let her have what's left of me. Nobody said anything for a long moment. That's the kind of silence that has weight. It sits on your chest. Carol didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that, because these stories always want a clean, tearful reconciliation, and that's not always what real people give you. She stood up, said the review was clearly biased, and left the room with Jenna trailing behind her, the real estate friend awkwardly gathering his unused folder. Major Whitfield closed the case that day. The dispute was denied. The SGLI stood. The house stood. My status as next of kin stood. Carol's competing memorial service, when it happened 2 weeks later, was attended by 11 people, 6 of whom were Jenna's co-workers. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone to gloat. There was no revenge in it for me, because revenge was never what I wanted. I just wanted to be allowed to grieve my husband without defending my right to have loved him. The real ending of this story isn't the hearing room. It's 3 months later on a Sunday morning at Danny's grave. I go every Sunday. I bring coffee, 2 cups, out of habit I can't quite break. I sit on the grass even when it's wet, and I talk to him the way I used to talk to him across the kitchen table. About nothing and everything, about the leaking faucet and a promotion at the hospital and how the neighbor's dog got out again. That Sunday, I brought the letter. I read it out loud to him, sitting there with the grass staining my jeans, and when I got to the last line, I said it back to him like a promise. I have what's left of you, Danny. I'm keeping it safe. Here's the thing I've come to understand, sitting at that grave every week since. Love isn't the people who show up for the photograph. It's the people who show up for the forms, the fevers, the 4 a.m. nightmares, and the folding of a flag nobody else wanted to fold. Danny knew that about me before I fully knew it about myself, and he made sure that even after he was gone, that truth couldn't be argued away in a hallway or bribed away with a casserole. He didn't leave me a fortune. He left me the truth, notarized, witnessed, and impossible to take back. That's my story. If you've ever had to fight for a place at a table you already belonged at, I want to hear about it in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one. And if this is your first time here, stick around. I've got more stories like this one, and I promise you, the good ones don't always end in courtrooms, but they always end in the truth coming out. Subscribe if you want to be there when it does.